The long walk to the airport, rain fell gently over Chennai that morning, a soft whisper on the tin rooftops, as Sundar tightened the laces on his worn-out shoes. They were once his father's brown leather, now cracked and faded at the edges, but still strong, still useful. Everything in his house was like that, used with care, kept with respect, never wasted. The house was small, a single-floor structure in a narrow lane, filled with children's laughter, the smell of sambar, and the clatter of bicycle bells. And that house, though modest, held more warmth than some mansions ever could. Sundar's father, Raghunatha Pichai, sat on the old wooden stool near the front door. He was holding a small steel tumbler, sipping his morning coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the damp earth outside. He didn't speak much in the mornings, not until the coffee was finished and the silence had said what it needed to say. But today he looked at his son and said something unexpected. "Don't forget how this feels." Sundar paused. The words had come softly, but with a strange weight. "How it feels, Appa?" He asked. His father looked down at the cup. This, wearing second-hand shoes, walking to the bus stop in the rain, sitting in the last row of the economy class because that's all we can afford. Remember it, not with anger, with gratitude. That was the moment, the one that would stay with Sundar all his life. Not the awards, not the headlines, not even the day he became the CEO of Google. It was this simple morning in a small house in the middle of a light rain. But back then, he had no idea what was coming. His flight to the United States was at 8:10 p.m. But they left the house before noon. Not because they wanted to be early, but because the journey to the airport was long and difficult. They couldn't afford a taxi. Instead, they walked to the bus stand, then waited for the 21 grams to Central Station, then took a packed local train to Tambaram. Sundar was carrying a single suitcase. It wasn't new. It was navy blue with a broken zipper that his mother had stitched shut with black thread. On the train, he stood near the door, the wind whipping his hair, the smell of the city filling his lung, diesel, dust, and jasmine from the flower vendors. He looked at his father, who was holding on to a metal pole, standing straight, face calm. There was no sadness, no visible pride, just a kind of quiet strength that didn't need to explain itself. At the airport, everything looked like another world, people in suits pulling sleek luggage, announcements in English and Hindi echoing through the air. Sundar stood in line for his boarding pass, clutching a small envelope in his hand. It held his visa, his passport, a few $100s his father had borrowed from friends, and a note from his mother. He hadn't read it yet. She had pressed it into his palm just before he stepped out of the house. "Not now," she had said. When you feel alone, he could feel it already. A kind of loneliness that crept in through the noise and lights. As he passed through security, he turned one last time. His father was still standing just beyond the glass barrier, hands folded behind his back, not waving, not crying, just standing there. That image would burn into Sundar's memory, like a photograph he could never delete. On the plane, he was in seat 42F, next to the window. A baby was crying behind him. The man next to him was snoring already. The flight would be long. 17 hours to New York, then another 3-hour layover, then a domestic flight to California. He had never flown before. Everything felt strange, the cold recycled air, the tiny screen in front of him, the seatbelt that clicked with a sharp snap. But the strangest thing was how small he felt and how big the world suddenly seemed. As the plane lifted off, Chennai shrank below him, the lights turning into tiny golden dots. He thought of his mother, probably washing rice for dinner. He thought of his brother, still in school, probably wondering when it would be his turn. And he thought of his father's words again, "Don't forget how this feels." He didn't sleep on the plane. Instead, he took out a small notebook and started writing. "I am not the smartest. I am not the richest. I am not the loudest. But I will try the hardest." Those were the first words of many he would write over the years. A promise to himself, made in the quiet dark of a plane flying across the world. When he landed in California, the sky was a deep blue he had never seen before. The air smelled different, clean, coal, a little like pine. He looked around the airport, feeling lost. People moved quickly, confidently, and everything seemed automated dash, self-dash, check dash-ins, escalators, signs flashing in bright colors. He had a slip of paper with an address on it. A small dorm room at Stanford. He showed it to the bus driver, who nodded and told him where to get off. The bus ride was long, and Sundar stared out the window, watching a world that looked like television. Wide roads, clean sidewalks, trees in neat lines. Buildings made of glass and steel dot when he reached the dorm. The sun was beginning to set. A student named Kevin, his roommate, opened the door. He had blonde hair and wore a hoodie with a dragon on it. "You must be Sundar," he said with a smile. "Welcome to Stanford." That night, Sundar lay on the small single bed, staring at the ceiling. He took out his mother's note and opened it. It said only one thing: be kind, always. He didn't cry, but he felt something shift inside. Something small and quiet and strong. Days turned into weeks. The classes were hard. Everyone around him spoke fast and knew things he didn't. He sometimes felt stupid, sometimes invisible. But he remembered his father's words, and his mother's, and he worked harder than anyone. Not just on assignments, but on listening, understanding, helping others. When someone dropped their books, he picked them up. When someone was alone at lunch, he joined them. Not to make connections, not for future favors. Just because it felt right. People noticed. Not immediately, but slowly. A professor asked him to join a research team. A classmate recommended him for an internship. Little by little, things started to change. But deep down, Sundar didn't change. Not the parts. That mattered. One night, during a thunderstorm, the power went out in the dorm. Most students left for the library. Sundar stayed. He sat by the window, listening to the rain. Kevin sat on the bed, looking at him. "You know," he said, "you're different. Not just smart. Something else." Sundar smiled. "I just remember where I came from." Kevin nodded. "You'll go far, but don't lose that." Outside, lightning flashed across the sky, and Sundar felt it like something was waiting for him. Something big, something difficult, but also beautiful. And he knew he was ready. Not because he was confident. Not because he had all the answers. But because he carried the strength of his father's silence, his mother's kindness, and the memory of a long walk to the airport in the rain. But what Sundar didn't know was that thousands of miles away, back in Chennai, something had happened. Something that would shake him to the core. And it had started with a phone call his father never answered. Asterisk. The call that never commuted night air in Stanford was unusually cold. Sundar sat by the heater in the corner of the dorm room, flipping through pages of his textbook, but he wasn't reading. Not really. The words sat on the page like strangers, unreadable and far away. He had tried calling home earlier that evening, but the line hadn't gone through. The familiar click and dial tone never came. Instead, there was just silence. That strange, hollow kind of silence that made the air feel heavy. He told himself it was nothing. Power outages were common in his part of Chennai. Maybe the landline was out. Maybe the phone wires were wet from the rain. Still, something didn't feel right. A small unease curled at the back of his mind like a shadow that wouldn't move. Kevin was asleep, headphones still in his ears, one arm hanging off the side of the bed. Sundar looked at the small alarm clock ticking on the windowsill. It was nearly 3 a.m. back home. Even if the lines worked now, no one would pick up. But the silence felt louder than any answer. His last conversation with his father replayed in his head. Don't forget how this feels. What had he meant, really? Was there something hidden in those words? Something more than a simple reminder? The next morning came with fog and a thin layer of frost on the grass. Sundar wrapped his scarf tight around his neck and headed to the computer lab early. His professor had given him access to a system rarely shared with first-year students, a gesture of trust, but also a test. The project was simple on the surface, to simulate the behavior of distributed networks. But Sundar had learned something important. Nothing was ever simple. Not people. Not problems. Not memories. As he typed, he kept glancing at the screen's corner where a tiny clock counted down the hours. In another 6 hours, it would be evening in India. He would try again. By noon, the unease had settled deeper. It wasn't just the phone. It was the quietness of his inbox. Usually, his mother sent him small emails, short notes in broken English about the cat, the neighbor's new baby, or how the jasmine plant was blooming again. But it had been 3 days since her last message. 3 days of silence. He finally stepped out of the lab and walked across campus to the International Student Office. There was a small corner booth with an old rotary phone, a scratchy green carpet, and a plastic sign taped to the wall that said, "Please limit calls to 10 minutes." The room smelled like dry paper and forgotten memories. He dialed the number. 1 ring. 2. 3. No answer. He hung up, waited a full minute, and tried again. Still nothing. He sat there for a while, the receiver resting against his chest. In that quiet booth, time moved strangely fast and slow at the same time, like waiting for a storm you can't see, but you know is coming. The next day, he went to class as usual. He took notes. He answered questions. He nodded politely when spoken to, but inside something was slowly unraveling. Worry has a strange way of dressing itself as routine. It sits inside you while you go through the motions, pretending everything is normal. On the 4th day, an email arrived. Not from his family, but from a neighbor. The subject line was simple. Call home. Immediately his chest tightened. He didn't finish reading. He ran. Back to the same booth. Back to the same number. This time, someone answered. But it wasn't his father. It wasn't his mother. It was Ravi, the boy from next door who used to climb mango trees. Barefoot and shout frickin' scores through the window. His voice was shaking. Anna, he said, "Uncle fell down 2 nights ago. He hit his head. They rushed him to the hospital. He's still unconscious." Sundar didn't speak. The receiver in his hand felt like it was made of stone. Amma didn't know how to reach you. The lines were bad, and she didn't want to scare you. "How is he now?" Sundar asked, but his voice barely came out. Ravi hesitated. "We don't know. The doctors say the next 24 hours are important." After the call, Sundar walked back across campus slowly. Everything around him was still the same. Students talking, skateboards rolling past, the smell of coffee drifting from the corner cafe. But for him, everything had changed. He sat on the steps outside the library, head in his hands. For the first time since arriving, he didn't feel like a student. He felt like a son, a helpless one. Memories flooded his mind. His father holding his hand on his first day of school. His father fixing the broken fan with a screwdriver and a flashlight. His father showing him how to use the old radio. How to tune into the cricket commentary by turning the dial just right. All the things he had never thanked him. For he thought of the flight ticket, how they had borrowed money to buy it. How his father had insisted he go, even when the bank balance said otherwise. That night, he wrote an email to his professor. "I need to go home," he wrote. "My father's in the hospital. I'll catch up on the work. I need to be there." He didn't sleep. He booked a ticket using every dollar he had left. Economy class, last row, just like before. As the plane took off, he looked out the window and whispered to himself, "Don't forget how this feels." When he landed in Chennai, the heat hit him like a memory. Thick, familiar, alive. He rushed out of the airport, heart pounding, looking for a cab, any cab. That would take him straight to the hospital. The streets looked the same, but somehow different. Maybe it was him who had changed. Maybe it was the knowledge that everything you love can change while you're not looking. He reached the hospital just as the sun was rising. The building was gray and tired. He ran up the stairs, 2 at a time, until he reached the IQ. His mother was sitting outside holding a steel tumbler of tea that had gone cold. Her eyes were red, her sari wrinkled. She looked up and smiled. A small, tired smile. "You came?" she said. He nodded, sat beside her, held her hand. They didn't speak. For a long time, Dot finally she whispered, "He hasn't woken up." Sundar walked into the room. His father lay still, machines beeping softly, his face calm, as if just sleeping. He sat beside the bed. "Appa," he said, voice breaking. "I got in. Stanford. Remember? You were right. It's hard, but I'm doing it. And I didn't forget. I didn't forget how it feels." A single tear slipped down his cheek. "I just need you to wake up." But his father didn't move. Outside, the sun rose higher. The world went on. But inside that small hospital room, time stopped. And in that stillness, something began to shift inside Sundar. Not a loss. Not yet, but a reckoning. A realization that success meant nothing if the people who built you couldn't be there too. See it Dot, and he knew then, without question, that this moment, this waiting, this not knowing would shape him more than any degree, any job, any title. But just as he closed his eyes, whispering a silent prayer, the monitor next to the bed beeped once sharper. Louder. His mother stood up. Dot the nurse rushed in. And in the next second, Sundar heard the sound he had been waiting for. His father stirred. Asterisk the weight of silenceth. Air in the hospital room was thick with the scent of antiseptic. But to Sundar it smelled like hope. His father's eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to the pale light above his bed. He turned his head slightly, the movement weak but certain, and for a moment, just one breathless second, the world became still. "Appa?" Sundar said, leaning closer, afraid to speak too loudly, as if this sound itself could break the fragile line between sleep and waking. His father didn't speak. His eyes moved, searching, then settled on his son's face. And in that gaze, there was something ancient and powerful, a mix of recognition, relief, and quiet pain. He tried to lift his hand, but it barely rose. Sundar took it gently, cupping it in both of his own. It was warm, alive. The lines on his father's palm were the same as remembered, but now they carried something more, a fragility, a kind of surrender. The doctor came in a moment later, walking with calm precision. She examined the monitors, nodded, and turned to Sundar and his mother. "He's stable," she said. "But he's weak. He will need time to recover." "Days? Maybe weeks?" His mother nodded. Her eyes didn't blink. Sundar only whispered, "Thank you." That night, Sundar stayed in the hospital, sleeping in a plastic chair beside his father's bed. His mother had insisted on going home to freshen up, to cook a proper meal for when he returned. She didn't say it, but Sundar knew she wanted to give him a moment alone with his father. The darkness of the hospital hallway crept into the room slowly, a quiet tide. Outside the window, the city buzzed as usual, horns, voices, motorbikes, coughing through narrow streets. But in the room, everything moved gently. Machines beeped softly. Curtains swayed and the fans breezed as midnight approached. Sundar's father spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even clear. But it came through the silence like a stone thrown into still water. "Why did you come back?" Sundar sat up straight. "I had to," he said. "You were in the hospital. I couldn't stay there," and his father shook his head slightly. "You left something important behind." Sundar frowned. "No, I brought my laptop. My notes. I'll catch up." "No," his father said, eyes half closed. "You left forward." Sundar sat back slowly. He understood what his father meant. When he boarded that flight to Stanford, he had left with dreams, with hunger, with purpose. Now he had come back with worry, with fear, with guilt. His father opened his eyes again. "You are meant to build, not to be broken by storms." Sundar looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not broken," he whispered. I didn't know what to do. I thought I would lose you." His father's lips turned up slightly. Not quite a smile, more like an understanding. "One day," he said, "you will lose me. Not today, but one day. So don't waste the days we have left." In that moment, Sundar felt something shift inside him. Not pain, but clarity. The kind that comes when truth is spoken out loud and accepted. For what it is for the next few days, Sundar stayed home. Not just in the house, but in the life. He woke early, helped his mother make tea, went to the market to buy vegetables, and sat beside his father every evening, reading aloud from the newspaper, even when his father pretended not to care. The neighbors came often, some bringing food, some just sitting for a few minutes before, disappearing back into the rhythm of their own lives. He saw his city differently now. The cracks in the walls, the stray dog at the corner tea stall, the man who swept the temple steps every morning without fail, none of it had changed. But Sundar had. He walked past his old school one afternoon and saw a group of boys sitting on the stone steps eating mangoes and laughing. Their uniforms were dusty, their shoes mismatched. One of them had a torn bag held together with string. Sundar stopped and watched for a while. He had been one of them once. He pulled out his phone, took a picture, and sent it to Kevin with a short message. "This is where it all began," Kevin replied 2 minutes later. "They have no idea who's watching them right now. One day, you'll change the world for kids like them." Sundar smiled. Maybe he would. But right now, he just wanted to remember, on his last night in Chennai, his father was strong enough to sit. They sat on the rooftop together, wrapped in shawls, sipping hot coffee. The city stretched out before them, glowing with orange streetlights and the soft hum of life. "What if I fail?" Sundar asked suddenly. His father took a long sip of coffee. "Then fail with grace," he said, "and start again. Always start again." Sundar nodded. The words didn't fix everything, but they gave him permission to breathe. Asterisk, his flight was the next morning. Again, economy class. Again, window seat. This time, he didn't feel small. He felt full. Full of everything he had seen and everything. He still had to learn before boarding. His father gave him a small envelope. "Don't open it now," he said. "Wait for a storm." It was the same voice, the same presence, but something had changed. Sundar felt it. A quiet passing of weight. A shift of responsibility on the plane. He sat back and stared out the window. Chennai grew smaller below him. Not in importance. Only in size. He opened his laptop and wrote a single sentence. "My strength is not in what I know. It is in what I carry." Asterisk. When he returned to Stanford, the semester had moved ahead. Classes had progressed. His group project had missed 2 milestones. He was behind, way behind. But something in him had changed. He was no longer afraid of being behind. He knew now that time was not something to chase. It was something to understand. He went to his professor's office and explained everything. Not with excuses, but with honesty. The professor listened quietly, then said, "Take the weekend. Catch your breath, then come back and show us what you can do." That weekend, Sundar walked across campus alone. He sat on a bench outside the old library, watched the sunset, and thought about the boys on the stone steps back home. He thought about his mother's hands, always busy, his father's silence, and the small envelope he hadn't opened yet. He still hadn't opened it. That night, as rain tapped softly against the window, he took it out. The paper inside was yellowed and creased. It had just 3 lines. "Remember what can't be taught. Respect what can't be measured. And build what doesn't yet exist." He folded the note carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and stored it in the same notebook where he had once written, "I am not the smartest. I am not the richest. I am not the loudest. But I will try the hardest. And now." He added a new line. "I will never forget how this feels." But just as things began to settle, something unexpected happened at Stanford. A professor approached Sundar after class, his tone urgent, his eyes serious. "There's a team," he said, "working on something new, something that could change the internet. They've been watching you." Sundar blinked. "Me?" "Yes," the professor said. "And they want to meet you, now." Outside, the rain fell harder. Inside, Sundar felt it. Another storm was coming. Asterisk, the room with no window sit was a Thursday morning when everything shifted. Sundar had just finished a 3-hour seminar on systems architecture. His brain was full of numbers, theories, and equations, but something deeper had been bothering him all week, something quieter. He had returned to Stanford with more than books and deadlines. He had returned with a sense that time had become precious. His father's voice still echoed in his thoughts. Build what doesn't yet exist. Those words clung to him like skin. He was walking past the engineering building when his professor called out from across the courtyard. Sundar, he said, waving him over. I need you to meet someone. There was no warning, no context. Just a glance at his watch and a short sentence that would change the direction of everything. They're waiting in the lab. Second floor, conference room, don't be late. The lab was hidden behind an unmarked door, past rows of humming servers and blinking machines. Sundar had walked these halls before, but never beyond the main room. This time the door opened. For him, inside the air was cool, colder than it needed to be. The lights were soft and indirect, and the walls were white, smooth, without any decoration. 3 men and 1 woman were seated around a long table. They were older, maybe late 30s, or early 40s, dressed casually but with quiet confidence. Their eyes tracked Sundar as he entered, not unkindly, but with a kind of focused curiosity that made the room feel smaller than it was. You're Sundar. One of them said, not as a question, but as a statement. He nodded, suddenly aware of how plain his clothes were, how worn his shoes looked. We've read your work, the woman said. We've seen your logic models, especially the one you submitted for Dr. Kuitrov's project. Elegant, disciplined, not flashy. Sundar wasn't sure what to say. He had written that model late one night after walking for an hour in the rain. It had come from something simple. He had wanted to fix the inefficiency he saw in how systems talk to each other. Nothing glamorous, just ... cleaner. We're building something, the man at the end said, leaning forward. Something that might reshape how people find information. The words landed like thunder in Sundar's chest. A search engine? He asked. Not just that, the woman said. A new way of organizing the web, of understanding intention. Not just matching keywords. They spoke for nearly an hour. Diagrams, strategy, code names. Everything was in early stages, still raw, but the vision was clear and ambitious. We want you on the team, the lead said at the end. Part-time for now, if you can handle it. Sundar blinked. He was still catching up. I'm still a student, he said. I have research ... and classes. The woman smiled. You'll figure it out. The ones who belong here always do. As he left the room, the door closed behind him with a soft click. It felt like stepping out of one world and back into another. He walked back to his dorm in silence. The campus buzzed around him, students laughing, bikes zipping past, music playing from an open window. But inside him, everything had gone still. That night, he stared at his ceiling for hours. Ambition is strange. It doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it comes quietly, dressed as opportunity, holding out its hand, asking, are you ready? He thought of his father, of the hospital, of the long silence between them. Then, the moment it broke, he thought of the note, respect what can't be measured. This team, they were offering him a future. Not guaranteed, not easy, but new. And big. He said yes. The next day, the project began in a small corner of the lab, tucked between coffee-stained whiteboards and outdated servers. There were only 5 of them. 6 with Sundar. Each brought something. Different code, systems thinking, user behavior models. Sundar brought calm, precision, humility. He didn't talk much, but when he did, people listened. He noticed things others missed. He asked the kind of questions that slowed the room down, forced everyone to think again. Not questions to impress, but questions that revealed gaps, hidden flaws in logic. Soon, the others started leaving their notes for him to check before sending them to the lead. One afternoon, the lead pulled him aside. You don't look for spotlight, do you? Sundar shook his head. Good, the man said. Just don't let it blind you when it eventually finds you. The words stayed with him, not because they were wise, but because Sundar didn't believe them. Not yet. He still felt like the boy on the back of the bus, the one who listened more than he spoke. Weeks passed. Code became prototypes. Tests became feedback. Ideas became arguments. One day, the woman on the team snapped at Sundar during a heated design debate. "You're playing it too safe," she said. "This isn't a school project." He stayed quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "It's not about safety. It's about trust. If users don't trust the results, it fails, no matter how smart it is." She stared at him for a moment, then nodded once. Later, she left him a note. "You were right. I just didn't want you to be. The project consumed more of his time." Sundar started missing classes, skipping meals. Some nights he didn't sleep at all, but he didn't complain. He was building something real. But he was also changing. Kevin noticed first. "You okay?" he asked one night as Sundar came in just before sunrise. "Fine," Sundar replied, dropping his backpack. "You don't talk anymore. You barely smile." "There's just a lot going on," Sundar said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah," Kevin said quietly. "But you used to tell me about it. Now you just disappear into it." Sundar didn't reply. He just lay down and stared at the ceiling. That weekend, he received a letter from home. His mother's handwriting. Shaky, curved, simple. APPA is walking again. Slowly. "He fixed the radio yesterday. Said it still works. We miss you. Don't lose your smile." And then he read the letter 3 times. That night, he didn't go to the lab. He walked instead. Past the football field. Past the old clock tower. Past the bench where he had once written, "I will never forget how this feels." And he realized something. He had started forgetting. Not everything, but parts, little things. Like how the jasmine smelled at home. How his father stirred sugar into his coffee. How it felt to build without needing to be seen. He sat on the bench for a long time. He didn't cry. But something inside him bent just slightly, not breaking. Just bending like a branch heavy with rain. The next morning, he returned to the lab early. Before anyone else, he erased 2 whole sections of code. Sections he had written in haste. In pride. He rewrote them from scratch. Slower. Better. When the team arrived, they noticed. "Why did you change it?" One asked. Sundar simply said, "Because now it works the way it should." No one argued. That week, something shifted again. Not in the project. In him, he had begun to understand that building something real wasn't about being first. It was about being right and being kind along the way. But just as the prototype was about to go live, just when everything seemed to be falling into place, Sundar received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was calm, unfamiliar. "Mr. Pichai," the voice said. "We'd like to talk to you about your work in person." "Who are you?" Sundar asked. "We represent a company," the voice replied. "They've been watching your project, and they're interested." The call ended with an address. No explanation. No name. Just a place. And a time. Tuesday. 10 a.m. Location. Mountain View. Asterisk. The invitation sky was still pale when Sundar stepped out of the train station. Mountain View stretched quietly before him, its streets clean, its buildings understated. There were no grand signs, no towering logos screaming for attention, just glass, steel, and an unspoken hum of something important happening behind those walls. Asterisk. He carried nothing but a slim folder tucked under his arm, filled with handwritten notes, scribbles from long nights in the lab, and one sketch he had made in a moment of instinct, an idea for simplifying how browsers could anticipate user behavior. He hadn't shown it to anyone yet. He didn't even know if it worked, but it felt important, and that was enough to bring it with him. The building he entered looked like 100 others, quiet. Professional, designed not to impress but to absorb. A receptionist greeted him with a smile, handed him a visitor badge, and pointed down a hallway. Sundar walked past glass walls behind which people moved quickly, tapping on keyboards, speaking into headsets. scribbling formulas onto whiteboards that reached from floor to ceiling. When he entered the room. 3. People were already waiting. One of them stood up immediately and extended a hand. He had a calm face, a sharp gaze, and a posture that spoke of both curiosity and calculation. "Welcome," the man said. "We've been hearing about you." Sundar shook his hand. "Thank you. I'm still just a student." The man smiled. "Not for long." They asked questions. Not just about code or theory, but about purpose. "What are you trying to build?" One of them asked, "Something that helps people," Sundar replied. "That's vague," another said. "Yes," Sundar admitted, "but it's the truth. If you don't start with helping people, everything else becomes noise." They nodded slowly. Then the man who had first greeted him leaned forward. "We've seen your project. It's clever." "More than clever, really. It's thoughtful, restrained. You didn't build it to be loud. You built it to last." Sundar said nothing. He wasn't sure what was coming next. "We think you'd do well here. Not just on our search team. Maybe somewhere bigger. Chrome, perhaps. Not now. Later, if you're patient," Sundar frowned. "Chrome? We're experimenting," the man said. "A browser? Fast? Intuitive? Clean?" Sundar's eyes widened. He had heard whispers about it, late-night rumors in the labs. But no one really knew what it was yet. "Not fully. You're building it in-house?" he asked. "But quietly, we need people who understand speed and simplicity, who know how to make complexity invisible." Sundar felt something shift inside him. Not excitement, not ambition, something softer. A kind of knowing. He didn't say yes. "Not yet." Instead, he asked, "What happens if it fails?" The room went still for a moment. Then the man replied, "Then we learn. And we build again." After the meeting, Sundar walked for hours. Not to clear his head, but to let it fill. He thought about the small apartment back home. About his father fixing the radio, not because it was broken, but because it had stopped being heard. He thought about the boys on the school steps, peeling mangoes and sharing dreams that had no names. Yet, he thought about the team at Stanford, still debugging, still trying. What was he chasing? And more importantly, what would he become if he caught it? When he returned to campus, he didn't tell anyone. Not Kevin, not his professors, not even the team. He went back to the lab, opened his notebook, and rewrote the sketch he had brought to the meeting. This time, he added something new, a timeline. 7 days later, he received an envelope in his campus mailbox. Inside was a single piece of paper. "We're ready when you are." Nothing else. He stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it, placed it inside the same envelope that held his father's note, and went back to work. The next few months moved quickly. The team at Stanford disbanded slowly, some graduating, others joining startups. Sundar stayed, finished his degree. Took longer than expected. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't question it. He wasn't chasing the degree. He was chasing the craft. When he finally walked across the stage at graduation, there was no applause from a huge family, no loud cheering. Just a quiet clap from Kevin in the back row, and a silent smile from Sundar himself. He flew home 2 weeks later. This time, he could afford a seat closer to the front, not business class. Not yet, but closer. His father was waiting at the gate. Not behind glass. Right there. Standing with both feet firmly planted, arms crossed. Wearing the same watch he had worn since Sundar was a child. "So," he said, as they walked out into the Chennai sun, "what's next?" Sundar didn't answer immediately. He looked at the street vendors, the traffic, the kids running barefoot across the station platform. "Maybe something big," he said. "But maybe something small, too. I haven't decided which one matters more yet." His father smiled, placed a hand on his shoulder, then build both. He said for the next 2 weeks. Sundar stayed home. No laptop, no calls, no plans. He cooked with his mother, walked to the temple, listened to old radio broadcasts with his father. One night, He stood on the roof and watched the city breathe. He felt it in his chest how far he had come. How much further there still was. On his final night before returning to the U.S., his father handed him a folded newspaper clipping. "It's not about you," he said, tapping the paper gently. "But one day it might be." Sundar opened it, thought it was a small article about a team in California working on a new browser. It had no name yet, just a code.chromium. Are you going to join them? His father asked. "I think so," Sundar said. "But not because it's big, because it needs building. The right way." His father nodded. Double quotes, "Then build it like you built your first radio," he said. "With care, with time, and with your ears open." Back in Mountain View, things were already moving faster than Sundar expected. The project had grown. More people, more deadlines, more eyes. He was introduced to the new team as a systems lead, not the youngest, but close. Not the most vocal, but the one people came to when things stopped making sense. In meetings, he said little, but when he did speak, people paused. His suggestions weren't always complex. Sometimes they were as simple as, what if we don't need that feature? Or, what if the user doesn't care about that data? Or, have we tested how it feels? People began to realize something. He wasn't just building code. He was building trust. One of the engineers pulled him aside one evening, long after Mose had left the office. "You know," he said, "you remind me of something I forgot." "What's that?" Sundar asked. "That simplicity is harder than complexity." Sundar smiled. "It always is." But even as Chrome began to take shape fast, clean, sharp, there was pressure. Meetings grew longer. Leadership began asking questions not about code, but about launch dates, marketing, impact, and somewhere along the way, Sundar began to feel the weight again. Not the weight of work, not the weight of expectation. Some nights, he stared at the glowing screen, his reflection staring back. And he asked himself the question no one else would dare ask. If this succeeds, will I still recognize myself? Then one night, just before launch, he received an email from an old professor. No subject. Line. Sentence. Don't let the world make you forget what the world actually needs. Sundar closed the laptop, leaned back, and remembered. The rain. In Chennai, the boys on the school steps, the voice of his father, the warmth of jasmine in the early morning, and the truth in his mother's note: be kind. Always. But as Chrome prepared to launch, as the team worked around the clock, something happened that no one on the team had seen coming. A competing team, internal, secret, better funded, was working on a similar product, and they were preparing to launch first. Asterisk. The quiet before launch office felt colder than usual. Not because of the air conditioning, but because something unspoken had settled into the walls. Sundar walked past. Rows of blinking monitors nodding at people he had worked beside for months. But there was a stiffness in their return glances. Eyes that didn't meet his. Shoulders slightly tense. He had noticed it over the last few days. Whispers in conference rooms. Closed doors where there used to be open whiteboards. Code repositories suddenly locked. People moving in twos and threes. Quiet, watchful. At first, he thought it was stress. Launch was close, just 2 weeks away, and everyone was stretched thin. But something felt off. Not pressure. Secrecy. Then the email came. Not to him. Not directly. It was forwarded from a friend in infrastructure. A screenshot. No subject line. Just a few sentences. We'll announce first. Push ahead. We can always fix it later. Chrome team will have to adjust. The sender wasn't from outside. The company. It was someone from inside. Another team. Internal. Operating parallel. Building something similar. But faster. Flashier. Louder. Sundar sat in his office for a long time, staring at the email. The betrayal wasn't personal. It wasn't even surprising. In a world like this, fast-moving, competitive, full of vision and rivalry, these things happened. But what shook him was something else. They were planning to launch. Something incomplete, untested, because the race had become more important than the reason. That night he didn't sleep. He walked instead across the quiet campus, past the fountains, through the empty cafeteria. Outside, the street lamps cast long, soft shadows on the ground. He thought of the first time he had walked to the airport with his father. The rain, the worn shoes, the silence. He thought of the envelope his father had given him. Wait for a storm dot. This was the storm dot the next morning. He called a meeting, not with everyone, just the leads. The ones who had been there from the beginning, when they sat down. He didn't start with strategy dot. He started with a question. What are we building? They blinked, confused. A browser, one said. Chrome. Sundar shook his head gently. That's not what I mean. He looked around the room. At faces that were tired, brilliant, hopeful, scared.